death of your father.
Can you guys
Vincent hardly mentions the death of his father.
Can you guys hear the audio okay? Is the audio okay?
Despite the difficulties of their relationship, he was nevertheless affected by the news and tormented working class. Vincent saw in Zola a kindred spirit, embracing the social purpose of art as well as the artistic interpretation of reality.
Read lots of Zola. It's healthy stuff.
Did you catch that? I mean, what beautiful words, the artistic interpretation of reality. And I guess you can get that right, or you can butcher it. You can interpret reality and make a total mess, or you can be preoccupied with this idea of interpreting reality, and somehow you produce something that's wonderful, that's transcendental, something that is really valuable and meaningful to all of us, right? And it all gravitates to this idea of what is reality, and thinking about reality in a kind of a bleak way. You know, what are the woods? What are the woods that we're dealing with, right? So I'm going to go just a few seconds back and just play that again. So that's the other thing, is Van Gogh was interested in the social purpose of art. Think about that. Not art just for art's sake, or I want to be an artist, or I want to paint something and sell a picture. The social purpose of art. Isn't that quite a very out of the woods way of thinking about art? And I think it's the same attitude, that the same approach I've got to true crime. What if we could think about something that is essentially negative and destructive in a way that can actually uplift society? What if we can look at society in the face and say, you know what, maybe this isn't right. Maybe these things about society aren't right. And maybe if we're honest about it, if we're authentic, we can actually improve society. Well, art could do the same thing. And isn't that a wonderful thing to take some of these subjects and be so, on behalf of humanity, to be so affirmative, to have these sort of affirmations within the context that so much is meaningful, and there's so many opportunists. It's such a deep way, such a affirming, edifying way of thinking about something, don't you think? Okay, so here you see Van Gogh on a train. Bear in mind they don't have planes, and he's reading a book, and he's trying to imbue his art with some sort of spirit. And if you think about that, it's quite difficult. Imagine drawing a book, or drawing a tree, or drawing a wheat field, and trying to imbue that with some kind of deep, almost religious significance. Where would you begin? How would you begin? Right? It's actually quite extraordinary, that whole idea.
Read lots of Zola. It's healthy stuff. It clears the mind.
The next part of his journey would take him to the epicenter of the art world, leaving the Netherlands. Vincent arrived in Paris in February 1886, when the art scene was in transition. Impressionism had been dominant for over a decade, but now the hunt was on for something new.
So do you get that? At the time that Van Gogh discovers Paris, and bear in mind he was an art dealer himself, at the time that he returns, almost like the prodigal son, the whole art scene is in transition. The art scene is saying, we've gone through a particular phase, and we're ready for the next one, but we're not sure what it is. And Van Gogh himself is kind of floundering. He's trying to find himself. He's trying to find his voice. He's trying to find what he wants to say, essentially, right? And so he arrives in Paris at such an important time. The Eiffel Tower is about to be constructed. It's at a turning point in history, in a way. Vaccines are about, there's so many inventions that are about to come online. Street lighting is about to become a thing. And so he enters Paris after this long exile in the rural backwoods. In a way, he's kind of like a pressure cooker. The art has been building up inside of him. He's almost like a champagne bottle with the cork sort of pressed back in. He's ready to do his thing, right? He's overflowing with art, or he's sort of the art is sort of bubbling up inside of him. And although it's about to come out, he's not quite sure what he wants to say. And so coming to Paris is going to help him address that question. Coming to Paris is going to help answer what is it that I need to say and what is it that people want to hear. Not so much want to hear, but need to hear. What is what message is the world sort of waiting for?
Vincent intended to immerse himself in the artistic life of the city and moved to Montmartre with Theo into this house at 54 Rue Lepic.
So I've actually, in 2019, I actually went and stood right in front of that door in Paris. It's like a blue door. Took a couple of photos there. Got pretty horribly lost on the way to that door and pretty horribly lost on the way back, right? And so where we are right now is we are in, well, I look really red. I look like I'm a real ginger. In fact, I look very Murdoy, which I'm not sure I like very much. But anyway, and so we are now trying to get from late November to February, right? It is late November, and he's leaving Noonan. He's left Noonan already, and then he's going to go to Paris by the end of February, and that is the topic, the theme of this particular episode. Episode 36 is the road to Paris, and what I want you guys to concentrate on is we're going to look at his art, and what I want you to look at is this idea of the potential of this artist who's also in transition. Is he starting to experiment? He's not in Paris yet, but he's actually transitioning out of Noonan. He's going from Noonan to Belgium, which is on the way to Paris, right? And so the question is, do you sense something is going on in his art, that he's starting to drift away from dirty potatoes, that is leaving behind the green slime, that is starting to freshen up his whole approach, right? Do you kind of get that feeling? Is there some spark of that taking place? That's what you want to ascertain, right? So as we we're going to start dealing with his letter in a moment. I want to just tell you guys right now, the lights are out in my neighborhood. So this live stream wouldn't be possible without the solar power, right? It's quite a nice feeling. I kind of got a notification on my phone, something about you disconnected from the grid, and I thought, wow, what's that about? Is there some kind of problem with the not the dashboard, the main switchboard? And I thought, does this mean there's a power failure right now? And so I went to the window, opened the window, and I just saw darkness outside. Oh, okay, so it is a power failure. It's kind of a nice feeling that the lights are on, and that I can do some things I want to do when I want to do them, regardless. Incidentally, the guy in charge of Eskom, the power utility, he's been trying to do a good job, but in a sort of a cesspool, feeding trough of corruption situation. He's kind of just given a little bit of an expose. He's I wouldn't say spilled the beans, but he may have spilled one or two beans. And now they're thinking whether they should sue him, and he's hoping to leave the country very soon, because obviously saying some of these things can be quite dangerous. but he's the kind of guy who also doesn't want to. He seems like quite a tough guy. He also doesn't want to just leave without leaving some thank you note or whatever you want to, however you want to put it. Okay, so we're now going to deal with the next letter. For those joining, I do want to deal with the Murdoch case. You might be saying, why on earth are you doing this on such a momentous day when Alex Murdoch is on trial? Well, I don't really care about the defense narrative. I'm not really interested in the version that massages and explains all the little contradictions. I'm interested in the cross-examination. So if I'm going to cover something, it'll probably be that. It was really interesting how he said, oh, what a tangled web we weave. Interesting. Oh, like out of the mouths of babes kind of thing. Not that he's a babe. Okay, so we are now in Antwerp, that's in Belgium, and let's kind of get going with that. Just a little quick welcome to Chelsea, and I hope you enjoy tidying up your kitchen. I hope this is going to help the time go by. Helena, good to see you here as well. For those interested, for those who are members only on True Crime Rocket Science, I've just put up a interview I did with a Brazilian TV channel. So if you're a member, there's something waiting for you there. Cool. Okay, so let us continue. So this is the end of November. So really, we just need to get through December, January, and February. I don't think there's too much communication in January. So he writes, this is a fairly short letter. Dear Thea, I want to tell you I'm in Antwerp and that I already have seen a few things. I've taken a room for 25 francs a month. Remember, Theo sent him 50 francs. Well, 25 francs a month for, securing accommodation. And so the address is 194 Rue des Images, I think that's how you say it. I just want to see if we can maybe find this address. Who knows whether we can find this address in Belgium, just out of curiosity. Let's have a look. It's not, it says there's a partial match. There's a partial match. I guess the match is just for Antwerp. That's not much of a match. So if we go to this site, Van Gogh route, it looks like it was kind of over here. Studio House, Antwerp, Belgium. He stayed there basically for 2 months, December and 3 months, December, January, and February. Right? So it's this house over here. Is it going to let me? I guess that's the best we can do. So it's in this area, right? In that area. Okay. Shall we go back to the letter? And so apparently he was staying upstairs above a color dealer. How's that? So he didn't just pitch up in Antwerp. He chose where he wanted to stay quite carefully, and this shows his commitment to color. He's definitely thinking about color, so much so that he's living in a way above color. He says, so when you write, kindly send your letter to that address, right? Obviously this address. He says, I shall begin by telling you that I saw Lay's dining hall, and the walk on the ramparts, the skaters, the reception, and the table, and on a panel between the windows, St. Luke. And so he's talking about paintings that he's seen. So imagine going to a city and writing to your brother or writing to a relative, "Hi, I'm in this city. Hi, I'm in that city. What did you see?" "Well, I saw this painting and I saw that painting and that painting." Didn't you go to the park, or didn't you go and look at this or that? No, 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 I saw this painting and that painting. To my astonishment, the composition was somewhat different from the ultimate compositions, at least I imagine so, although I've not yet been able to compare photos of the pictures with them. Then it was painted in fresco on the plaster on the wall. Now, fresco really must and can last for centuries, but these have already faded considerably, and the one over the mantelpiece, especially part of the reception, also shows some cracks. The highly ingenious son of Baron Lees has also improved the hall by having a door enlarged so that in the skaters, the legs of the fellows standing on the bridge looking over the railings have been cut away. Let's just see if we can see the skaters. Let's just see if I can pull it up. Lees, the skaters. I don't think that is what I'm looking for. I'm seeing on Google, I'm seeing guys on skateboards. Okay, I can't really find it. This looks like it could be Jean August Hendrik Lees. Okay, so this looks like some of his art. Not terribly interesting as far as I'm concerned, but I guess not bad attention to detail. By the way, an electrician came into my home today, and he asked me about being a YouTuber, and I said, "How do you know I'm a YouTuber?" And he said, I saw your YouTube award for 100,000 subscribers. And so I said, "Jeepers," because it's not like very prominently displayed. So I said, "I guess electricians must have good attention to detail." So he says, "Yeah, we do." Okay, so anyway, the highly ingenious son of Baron Leys has done that. And then he says, "After so much that it rather disappointed me in the first place at the color of the fresco, and alas, I am afraid bad fresco is not what we are used to from Lees. After so much that disappointed me, after all, it is superb." The maid, let's just see if we can find this one. Maybe we can find something after all. The Walk on the Ramparts. Is it this one? Okay, I can't quite find it, but just FYI, this is the actual writing. This is the actual letter that we're dealing with here. It's this one here. Okay, it's not letting me do that. But this is the actual original writing. A couple of boo-boos here and there. It's a little bit wet in certain places, looks like over there. It's always, I think, quite interesting to see that. Okay, so it talks about the bird's eye view of the city. Is it this picture? Bird's eye view of the city? I'm not sure if it is. Then he says, "I've also seen the Museum of Old Pictures and the Musée Moderne. I agree with you that the figures on the first plane, those heads in Le Christ are Purgator," I think that's Christ in Purgatory, are very beautiful, finer than the rest. I'd just like to at least look at some of them. But anyway, this entire letter seems dedicated to, I really like this picture and I really like that picture. I don't know if it refers to this one. I don't know if it refers to this one, but it might. Can we blow this up? All right, so that seems to be what he's talking about. And so a lot of this letter is all about art. I was very much struck by Frans Halse's Fisher Boy. And then he talks about Rembrandt and Van Gogh and Raystal. Right, let's have a look at Frans Halse's Fisher Boy. Is this it? I think so. So he is talking about that particular picture. And again, if you look at this image, look how actually somber these colors are. It's still the colors of dirty potatoes, right? Can you see that? It's still pretty somber tones. Look in the background, there's the sea. The sea doesn't even have a hint of blue. Behind this kid is the sky. There's not really, there's maybe a tiny hint of blue over there, but it's everything is gray and tones of poo once again. And you kind of get the idea that this has been in vogue for centuries, perhaps, painting things in various shades of poo. And Van Gogh is saying, here's another cool poo picture, right? And we want to look at whether his art starts deviating from the poo approach, right? So in the Musée de Monet, he talks about that, and life-size cows by the God-fearing Verboekhoven. But I've seen very little at the art dealers, next to nothing. One little painting the size of a hand, not even as good as Raffaelli. Otherwise, nothing special. But there is the good old Dutch proverb, never despair. I, like Antwerp, have explored the city in every direction. The keys are most characteristic. Well, it will never hurt knowing Antwerp a bit. It will probably prove to be like everything everywhere, namely disillusioning, but with its own atmosphere. So there's a little bit of pessimism. I suppose you could even call it snark from Van Gogh. He's saying Antwerp is kind of like anywhere else. It's a bit disillusioning. It's a little bit of a glimpse that Van Gogh doesn't seem terribly happy with where he is. He's seen a lot of art, but he's already a little disillusioned. And this is a clue that he arrives in Antwerp a little with still itchy feet. And so it's no wonder that he goes to Paris as soon as he does. He is feeling restless, right? He says, it is good to have a change now and then. Okay, now we go into the next letter. 28 November 1885. My dear Theo, I just wanted to send you a few more impressions of Antwerp this morning. So the way I would say it is Antwerp. To say it in English doesn't quite sound right. This morning I took a long walk in the pouring rain. I love it when he does this because you kind of get a sense of traveling back in time and putting Van Gogh's coat on and putting tying his shoes with his hands and then stepping out as Van Gogh into his world. And this is one of those little glimpses. He says, I took a walk in the pouring rain, the object of the outing being to fetch my things from the custom house. You can imagine this artist in a new city walking all by himself. It's raining, and he probably cuts kind of quite a desolate figure in a desolate situation. And who would imagine that this person is going to become world famous? Who can imagine that this figure walking alone in the pouring rain, at this point, really a nobody, someone whose father's died, someone who sees himself as a tattered um, uh, volume of a book by Emile Zola, is going to amount to anything. And literally, you've got someone, a kind of a towering presence from history, passing by, and people probably not even noticing. People probably thinking it's a tramp. It's a guy who doesn't really have much or whatever. He walks by various warehouses and storage sheds on the quays, and in the rain, he even appreciates how beautiful warehouses look and storage sheds, right? And there, I think, is a glimpse of the great Van Gogh, someone who can look at something and see beauty in it when anyone else is just trying to get from A to B because it's raining. He says, I've walked in many different directions along the docks and quays several times already. And that's another glimpse into what makes Van Gogh so admirable is even though it's raining, he's energetic. Even though he's disillusioned, he's a man on a mission. Even though it's bear in mind, it's raining in the end of November. It's winter, almost midwinter in the Netherlands. It's pretty grim. It's a pretty grim conditions, and he's out there walking. If you think about the fact that his father died after being out in the rain himself, you kind of feel like, aren't you playing with fire, Vincent? Is this really wise? Anyway, he says the contrast is particularly marked for one who's just arrived from the sand and the heath and the tranquility of a country village. So he's talking about being in this setting is kind of exhilarating. In a way, it's the Coburger version of coming from Pennsylvania and going to Pullman. He's talking about, wow, it's so strange coming from the tranquility of a country village and seeing all of this activity on the docks. Is feeling the energy in this contrast. He says it's all an impenetrable confusion. So in a way, he's actually finding it a little bit intimidating, perhaps as Koberger did as well. All of this activity, things going on, and he's used to a slower pace. He's used to a turnover that is far more gradual, where you can hear one sound. In the country, you hear a dog bark and a duck quack, and someone, hammering on whatever, or the scrape of a shovel into the ground. That sound in isolation, whereas in this setting, all these sounds flow together into a kind of a noise, and that can be a little, dizzying, right? Then he says one of the Concord sayings was Japoneseri forever. Well, those docks are one huge Japoneseri, fantastic, peculiar, unheard of, or at any rate, that's one way of looking at them. I would love someday to take a walk there in your company, just to find out if we see things in the same way. You must also bear in mind he's doing all of this alone. He's going from one place to another, and it's just him. And his sort of one real friend in the world is his brother. And he's kind of saying, I wish you could just come here and take some of these walks with me. And let's see if that happens. Is Theo going to come and join Vincent it's just down the road or sort of up the road? Is he going to join him? That's right. That's correct. Mel Stiller, well, I mean, if you want to take it that seriously, I suppose you can say it's the color of poverty. I don't know if that's what he's trying to capture. I don't think he's trying to capture poverty. I think he's trying to capture a corner of gritty reality. I think he is trying to capture human circumstance, but I don't think he's trying to say, woe is me, and this is how pathetic our lives are. The point is he is missing he's missing the point. He's missing the fact that you can look at something, even like that boy on the beach, and you can fill that portrait up with energy, and you can make that sky come alive, and that's really what needs to happen. In other words, you can invigorate um, the simple and the obvious with life. That anything alive is actually quite heroic and electrifying. Especially if you've come out of the dark, right? Gwen, welcome. Thanks for being here. I hope you're going to find it interesting. So he talks about, he says, the point I'm trying to make is that there are always figures in motion there. One sees them in a stranger's setting. Everything looks fantastic with interesting contrast at every turn. A white horse, and this is obviously yet another little transplantation that takes us back in time. It's like going in a time machine. And through his eyes, through his writing, through his words, he refers us to a white horse in the mud in a corner where piles of merchandise lay covered with a tarpaulin. And of course, a white horse going down into the mines is part of the whole Emile Zola mythos, right? So I think it reminds him of that, makes him think about that. He talks about the old black smoke-stained walls of the warehouse, perfectly simple, but with black and white effect. Through the window of a very elegant English public house, one can look out on the filthiest mud and on the ship from which, say, such pleasing wares as hides and buffalo horns are being uploaded. Where do you think that comes from? Where do you think these buffalo horns are coming from? Where do you think he talks about docker types as ugly as sin, that are unloading these kind of precious cargoes from far away, exotic cargoes, and you got these rough sailors contrasting with. He talks about very delicate English girl standing at the window looking out at this or at something else, and so he's finding this contrast quite sort of bewitching. It's in a way the Star Wars equivalent of Luke Skywalker going into that watering hole in Tatooine. It's kind of a realization of the rough edges of the world and also the delicate side of the world. He talks about the interior with figure wholly in tone, and for light, the silvery sky above the mud and buffalo horns. Again, a series of fairly strong contrasts. And so what he's thinking about here is contrast. He's thinking about rough and delicate, this feeling of something that's very local and very regional, and then these things that have come from far away, right? Flemish sailors with excessively ruddy faces and broad shoulders, lusty and tipsy, Antwerpers through and through, are to be seen eating mussels or drinking beer with a great deal of noise and commotion. In contrast, there goes a tiny little figure in black, small hands clasped close to her body. So he's noticing in this sort of masculine environment of sailors and drunkenness and sort of eating mussels with one's hands, drinking beer and beer sloshing over beards. He's seeing a delicate girl, and she's moving quietly without making any sound past the gray walls. And it describes her as having jet black hair, small oval face, brown, orange, yellow. I'm not sure. And you kind of want to jump onto his shoulder in this moment and just, even though what he's describing is a perfectly ordinary scene, some people doing this and then somebody walking past. But you kind of, in a way, you feel like you are there anyway. And he talks about, for a moment she looks up, gives a slanting glance from a pair of jet black eyes. She's a Chinese girl, quiet as a mouse, stealthy, small, naturally bedbug-like. What a contrast to the group of Flemish mussel eaters. And I can kind of feel what he's talking about, because I lived in South Korea for quite a few years, 4 or 5 years, and The Asians are very, especially the Asian women, are very modest, very feminine. You do notice they've got hair like oil. It is jet black. They are often very shy, and he's contrasting something that's incredibly exotic and probably quite bewitching to his own culture. You know, these almost Viking-like Dutchmen who are loud and kind of getting drunk. And so you've got this person who's far from their sort of homeland. You know, it's a little bit of a glimpse of globalization, like early globalization. Someone from possibly China who's sort of wandering around the docks of Belgium. And that was possible in that time, you know, with uh, uh, sailing ships and that sort of travel. And so this is something that's really making an impression on him. He's seeing people and they are coloring his consciousness. And again, you can kind of get a sense that Brian Koberger must have had the same thing. He's not just entering a new environment, he's really caught up by how beautiful certain things are and also how confusing certain things are. And he's trying to find his place, right? Anyway, he says, what a contrast to the group of Flemish muscle eaters. Another contrast, one walks down a very narrow street between tremendously tall buildings. So that's something else that may feel quite weird to a country bumpkin where your tall buildings on a farm are basically wheat fields and sunflower stalks and maybe the occasional tall poplar or cypress or whatever. Now they are genuinely tall buildings, and that is again a sign of modernity creeping into the urban project. And he says, but at ground level in the streets, ale houses for every nationality. So it's very cosmopolitan. He's just caught up by the wash of all sorts of different people, and he's kind of part of that wash as well. And he talks about males and females to match, shops for food, for seamen's clothing, colorful and bustling. The street is long. At every turn, one sees a typical scene, a commotion perhaps more intense than usual, as a squabble breaks out. So just think about what a contrast all of this is to, again, the farm. Instead of geese squabbling or, you know, dogs, you know, squabbling with one another, it's people squabbling, but in a rowdy way, in a drunken way. And it's quite amusing to him, I guess. And I guess he is, in a way, maybe um, kind of appalled. But I think there's another part of him that's like, uh, I want to do this. I want to kind of be part of this revelry, right? He says, for example, there you are walking along, just looking around, and suddenly cheers go up, and there's a lot of yelling. A sailor is being thrown out of a brothel by the girls in broad daylight. And so, almost like on his first day in Antwerp, it's like, oh, here's a brothel. Look at these pretty girls. And the gears are starting to turn, right? And he says, in broad daylight, the sailor is being pursued by a furious fellow and a string of prostitutes, of whom he seems to be terrified. So here, prostitutes are running after this sailor, and this sailor's running away. Anyway, I see him clamber over a pile of sacks and disappear through a window into a warehouse. So all of this is pretty vivid, right? When one has had enough of this hullabaloo, interesting word, with the city behind one at the end of the landing stages where the Harwich and Havre steamers lie. There is nothing, absolutely nothing to be seen in front except for an infinite expanse of flat, half-flooded pasture. That's obviously typical of that part of the world. Immensely melancholy and wet with undulating dry reeds and mud. So think about this contrast, the noise, the mayhem, all these people from all over the world running around, and then you look another way and you're back to almost a farm setting. This immensity of that sort of melancholy and almost like a quagmire, right? He talks about the river with a single small black boat, water in the foreground, grey sky, misty, cold grey, still as the desert. Look at these colors, grey, grey, right? All of those colors. As to the overall impression of the harbor or one of the docks, at one moment it is more tangled and fantastic than a thorn hedge, so chaotic that one finds no rest for the eye. By the way, if you want to follow with me, I'll put a link in chat. But isn't this incredible? Isn't this like, it's almost like watching a movie? He's just describing himself walking through the streets of Antwerp in Belgium. It's pretty incredible. It's like so vivid. Um, and I mean, he's not really part of any dynamic. He's simply a spectator. He's merely a passerby, right? What does he say here? At one moment, it is more tangled and fantastic than a thorn hedge, so chaotic that one finds no rest for the eye, grows giddy, and is forced by the papilloting. I think that's another word for flickering. Vincent Dutchified the French, okay, so that word, of colors and lines to look first here and there and then there, unable to distinguish one thing from another. So is referring to, is specifically changing, where you anglicize is where you turn some other word into a kind of an English word. Well, he's Dutchifying a French word for flickering, and he's just talking about this flickering scene. There's just so much activity in front of him. Colors and lines flickering. And isn't that how his art almost appears? When you watch that incredible animated movie, Loving Vincent, it flickers, doesn't it? And in a way, that is what he's seeing. He's seeing the world in motion. And isn't he trying to capture that motion in his art? Isn't that quite a good assessment there? But if one moves on to a certain spot with an undefined stretch of land in the foreground, then one again encounters the most beautiful, most peaceful lines and those effects which Moles, for instance, so often achieves. See if we can find any art by Moles. Is this it? I'm hoping this is right. It's talking about lines. I don't know if Peter van Mol, I don't know actually which one is actually referring to. I don't know if it's this. It might be. Anyway, so he says, here one may see a splendidly healthy looking girl who is, or at least seems, wholly honest and unaffectedly cheerful. There a face so slyly vicious, like a hyena's, that it frightens one. Not to forget, and he's such a good writer. I mean, he could easily have, I think, become a novelist, right? Not to forget faces ravaged by smallpox, the color of boiled shrimps, with dull gray little eyes, no eyebrows, and sparse, greasy, thinning hair, the color of pure hog bristle, or a bit yellower Swedish or Danish type. So there's just kind of a smorgasbord of nationalities. And you do notice he's starting to notice pretty girls, right? He's 32 years old, and obviously that part of him is still functional. He says, I'd like to do some work around there, but how and where, for one would get into trouble exceedingly quickly. All the same, I've roamed through quite a number of streets and alleyways without mishap, have even sat down to talk in a very friendly way with various girls who seem to take me for a bargee. What's that? Anyone know? I don't know if it's like is it a barkeeper? Oh, someone in charge of working on a barge. Okay. So they kind of take him for a not a pirate, but a basically a sailor of sorts, right? So he goes on to say, I think it not unlikely that painting portraits may help me to come by some good models. I got my gear today and some materials. So wonderfully modern the way that he expresses himself. It doesn't feel like you are going back 130 years. It feels like, yeah, I got my gear, I got some materials. I'm looking forward to get going. He says, so my studio is all ready. If I could come by a good model for a song, I'd be afraid of nothing. Nor do I mind very much that I haven't enough money to force the pace. So once again, um, he's in a fairly grim setting. There's sort of prostitutes around, sailors getting drunk. He's walking around in the rain. People are fighting and so on. And he's as pleased as punch. He's quite a happy camper, and is saying, even though I don't have any money, I don't mind, nor do I mind that I don't have enough money. Again, this shows you that Van Gogh isn't like everybody else. His um, struggle is part of the adventure that he wants to be on, right? Then he says, perhaps the idea of doing portraits and getting the subjects to pay for them by posing is a safer method. You see, in the city, things aren't the same as when one deals with peasants. So this is the kind of, although I think it's a very crude comparison, but this is kind of um, shows in a way, I think, Van Gogh being a bit more emotionally, bear in mind he's older by at least 4 years, but is more is less socially awkward than Koberger, for example. Koberger can't talk to girls. Koberger brings Rome. When Koberger is in Rome, he remains a Gaul, right? When Van Gogh is in the city, he realizes I've got to treat these women differently. He says, they're not peasants. And you kind of get the idea that Koberger treats yeah, in a way, treated the women around him almost like peasants, I guess, in a way, but certainly in a way that offended them, right? Then he says, one thing is certain, Antwerp is a splendid and very remarkable place for a painter. So, despite him being a little bit disillusioned, he's also very positive, right? My studio isn't at all bad, especially now that I've pinned up a lot of small Japanese prints. You know those small female figures in gardens or on the beach, horsemen, flowers, gnarled thorn branches. I'm glad I came here and hope not to sit still and do nothing this winter. So even though it's winter, he's getting out and about. Anyway, it's a relief to have a small hideaway where I can work when the weather is bad. It goes without saying that I won't be living in the lap of luxury. Again, he's okay with it. He's saying it's splendid here. I'm glad. He's not moaning. He's not whining. He's not complaining. Try to send your letter off on the first, for while I've enough to live on until then, I shall be getting the wind up after that. It's quite an interesting turn of phrase. My little room has turned out better than expected and certainly doesn't look dreary. Now that I have the three studies I took along with me here, I shall try to make contact with the marchands de tableau picture dealers, who seem, however, to live for the most part in private houses with no display windows giving onto the street. So again, he's becoming aware of how things are done differently in this enclave. The park is beautiful too. I sat there one morning and did some drawing. You can see he's really pretty active. He's really a go-getter. Well, I've had no setback so far, and I'm well off as far as accommodation is concerned. For by sacrificing another few francs, I've acquired a stove and a lamp. I shan't easily get bored, believe me. Can you see he's a very positive person within pretty difficult circumstances. I've also found Lermits October. Let's have a look for that. Woman in a potato field in the evening. I'm sure we can find that. Is it this? I'm not 100% sure if this is right, but I think it could be. Maybe not. I don't know. It is Lermit, but the title is Potato Planting in Spring. I don't know if it's got like an alternate title. Not sure why it's taking so long to load. Is it this? But this is the kind of art that he's talking about, and I must say I really like. I really like Lermit as well. I actually think that his art is a lot better than Van Gogh's. I don't think that's unfair or unkind to say. Okay, how do I get out of that? Let's have a look at a couple of other quite strange. I just want to move you a little bit that way, not that, this. Strange how it doesn't really let you do that. Okay, anyway. Let's go on to the next one. Okay, so that's not even Lermit, that's Alfred Watkins. What's this? Okay. Sorry, it's not quite what we want to be looking at. Anyway, so have you kept track of that by any chance? I've also seen that there's a Figaro illustrate with a beautiful drawing by Raffaelli. My address, as you know, is that ever yours, Vincent. Then he leaves this postscript saying, "It's odd that my painted studies look darker here in the city than in the country." Hooray! Hooray! This is exactly what we're talking about. So he moves himself into a different environment, right? It's just in a different setting. And in this different environment, he realizes, wow, my work's actually pretty dark. Hooray. Yeah, I'm glad you realized it. Your brown potatoes in a brown basket is pretty dark. Maybe you could lighten up a little. And from his writing, from his description of what he's seeing around him, is very kind of lighthearted. It's very filled with vitality and life, isn't it? Right? Okay, so he goes on to say, is that because the light isn't as bright in the city? I'm not sure, but so he's trying to think, is he getting this weird sense of contrast because in the city maybe the light isn't so bright? He says, I'm not sure, but it might matter more than one might think at first sight. I was struck by it and can imagine that some of the things that are with you now also look darker than I thought they were in the country. Yet those I brought along with me don't seem the worse for it. The mill avenue with autumn trees is still alive, as well as a few small things. I must say, this is one of the best letters I think we've covered so far. I think this was a beautiful letter, right? So remember, 28 November 1885. And now we're into the first week of December, and this painting that you see that I'm gonna put up on screen now. Do you see any? Do you notice any change in Van Gogh's approach to what he's painting? I'm going to put this on full screen. Now, you know, what's quite incredible about this painting is he's just described this almost zoo of activity around him. And yet this painting is sort of devoid of a single human being. And so you kind of get the idea that when he painted this, he kind of wanted to be private. He kind of wanted just to be able to be in his own space and capture the scene. But in a way, what he's capturing here is, you might think that's a very static scene. But for him, I think he's seeing kind of a cacophony of windows and walls and roofs, and you know, he's not used to seeing all of this. And for him, these are like skyscrapers. For him, these are very tall houses, and that's what he's trying to capture. for him, this is the equivalent of going to Manhattan in a way for everybody else, right? But can you see that there is quite a contrast? He was talking earlier about black and white, but can you see that there's a lot more color in this than in the brown potatoes? There's various shades of green, but there's something, there's a lightness and a whiteness that is coming into his typically dark uh, executions, right? So this is what he says. So it's been quite a while, for someone who writes as frequently as he does, quite a long time has passed, a week. And he writes, "Dear Theo, thanks for your letter," and the enclosed 150 francs. It's quite a lot of money, right? You almost get the idea that Vincent thought, I'm not going to write to him again until he sends me money. Or maybe he was just so busy working, who knows? Anyway, he says, "I want to tell you that I'm glad I came here. Last week I painted 3 more studies, one with backs of old houses seen from my window." So this is literally what he's seeing from where he's staying. And in a way, you want to almost imagine this into photographic reality. And one wonders whether probably if you went there, you wouldn't see anything nearly like that, but it does make you wonder. I mean, what you're seeing there is kind of, that's as close as you're going to get to it. But once again, you can see buildings on top of buildings next to buildings, right? Windows next to windows, parapets next to parapets, right? So he says, "I've exhibited one of those at a dealer's. Further, I've given the ones I brought along from the country to 2 others on commission." Yeah, I think it is candlelight. Let's have another look. I think it is candlelight. There you can see a little bit of yellow. Little bit of yellow. So, you might say, Nick, we sympathize, you don't have any electricity. Well, these people were living without electricity like it's normal, right? How's that? So these are quite toughened individuals as it is, right? Yeah, that's it. Okay. So yeah, so I mean that is, if you think about it, quite a lonely view. He's sitting in his room and slowly painting this picture, and he doesn't have a girlfriend in the kitchen saying, "Come and have a cup of coffee." So he talks about just go see where I am. He says, "Now these dealers are not the biggest ones in Antwerp, but at all their places, among many things I did not like, I saw things which pleased me. For instance, one had a picture by Van Goyen and a study by Troyen. At another's, I saw a Mals and small Dutch pictures. At another place, there was that small picture I mentioned to you." um, he talks about, "I want to come there with figure paintings." And then he says, "I've discovered useful resources for colors where I shall be able to get them fairly cheaply. And I've also traced Linich, whom you mentioned to me this summer when I asked you whether you knew people in Antwerp, but he has nothing but a few miserable little old pictures. Paints himself somewhat like Vertine, but seemed to me a discouraged man, if he ever had any courage, which I doubt. Does Van Gogh strike you as discouraged? He seems very motivated. He seems very animated, right? All these gentlemen, however, complain bitterly that trade is so slack, but that's not news. So in a way, he stands out as a kind of a bright flame in a somewhat dreary context. Shortly, I hope to be able to go and see that picture you wrote about, but I've been busy going backward and forward and also tracing those people and with model hunting too. The latter is always tremendously difficult, model hunting, but I've found them elsewhere, and so I shall find them here too. For tomorrow, I have an appointment with a splendid old man. Will he come? And so I think what he means there is he's met kind of a granddad, like an old dude, and this guy's supposed to sit and be sketched or painted or whatever. Today I received a supply of colors, which they forwarded to me from Antwerp, and I paid more than 50 francs for it. So just think about what we're talking about. He's paying 25 francs a month for a room, and he's bought colors for more than twice that. That shows priorities, right? He's paying, imagine paying whatever you pay per month to live where you do, whether it's the mortgage or rental or whatever. Imagine paying twice that amount just for color, right? That shows his commitment, his investment. It is hard, terribly hard to keep on working when one does not sell. But there's a quite a rare admission of the struggle. The struggle is real, right? Tomorrow says I would have loved to make Vincent coffee. I'm sure he would have loved that too. Okay. Then he says, when one literally has to pay for one's color out of what would not be too much for eating, drinking, and lodgings, however strictly calculated. So there he's very aware of the trade-off. I've got to buy color instead of eating well. I've got to buy color instead of I could live in a better in a better situation. I could buy color instead of buying clothing, right? He wants to eat and drink and be merry, but he's no, I'm going to buy colors instead, right? That's some kind of commitment, and he's aware of it as well. And then he says, but all the same, there is a chance, even a good one, because comparatively speaking, there are only a few painters at work nowadays. In my opinion, they are only half to blame for that. For the other half, they are. For sometimes it is too hard. All the same thing, they're building state museums and the like for hundreds of thousands of guilders, but meanwhile, the artists very often starve. So again, it's not news to him. It's not like, oh my God, I may struggle to survive. I'm going to commit suicide. Or, oh my God, I've, I've tried and tried, and this is going to be too difficult. I'm cutting my ear off. It's something he's very aware of. It's something that is absorbed. It's something that is accepted. It's something that is okay with. Artists very often starve. When I was a photojournalist, when I was freelancing, I kind of went to another freelancer and I said, can this be done? But I mean, I was really prepared to struggle. I was prepared to struggle very much, and I was prepared to work hard very much, and I was prepared for that to go on for a really long time. And I think if you're not, then that struggle is so much more difficult. First, if you acknowledge that life is hard, that makes everything easier. And that's what he does acknowledge. He says, I wanted to look into things myself again and find the chance of doing something not smaller but bigger than I thought. I've seen several photos or pictures by Jan van Beers. Some of his things have, after all, much character. But I imagine that someone like Manet, for instance, is much more of a painter than Van Beers and paints more beautifully and artistically. Do you guys want to see a painting by Manet, who's, I think, a contemporary of Monet, right? It's this sort of thing. These are Manets, M-A-N-E-T. See how colorful and in a way delicate it is. I'm sorry about the quality. It's not such great quality. And here's another one, also pretty colorful. Let me try and get a better quality image. This is from NPR. What a way to go. Even as he died, Manet made life-affirming art. Look at these beautiful executions. Look at that. Look at that. And it's exactly what we're talking about. It's life-affirming. And that is what this channel is all about. It's about an affirming message. And this is exactly what Van Gogh is pursuing himself, right? In the middle of adversity, he's seeing the sunshine. He's enjoying the patch of rain on his coat. He's enjoying the clop of his soles on the cobbles of the quays, right? He's enjoying being alive, but he's enjoying the simple things in life, right? Let's have a look at another one. Look at that beautiful picture. Can you see that there are hints of Van Gogh in these artworks? I mean, have a look at, is it this one? Have a look at that. And this is if you look at on screen right now and you compare what you see over here to what you see, look where my cursor is moving to. This is Van Gogh's art just out of frame. Can you see that there's some similarity in these dabs, these dabbing motions? And these dabbing motions is evoking the same flickering that he's feeling, the same flickering that he's seeing, right? It's no longer this attempt like Lermite to capture every little detail, every wrinkle. It's more trying to express something that's beyond that, right? I mean, compare the lack of detail in this to this. And then ask yourself, which do you prefer? Right? Which do you prefer? Is there a way I can have both on screen at the same time? Can I maybe reduce this? And then you say, which do you prefer? Right? And I think there's some people who are saying there's nothing wrong with poo-colored art or poverty or whatever. That's not the point I'm trying to make. I'm trying to show that he's transitioning from this brown, gray world to something brighter, right? He's noticing a brighter way of looking at things, a brighter way that art can represent people and nature and everything else. And look at how much less detail there is in this face and how much more detail there is in this face, and yet there's something more modern and fresh about this picture. In a weird way, you seem to be seeing beyond what the artist has actually painted. The artist is suggesting something that you're seeing in your mind, right? There you go. So it's not only Van Gogh's art and his mind and his heart that is starting to change course. It's also he's noticing art around him and he's starting to think, I hadn't thought of that. Let's see if there's another one. Is there one more? So 4 mandarin oranges. Now, look how fresh that is compared to potatoes, brown potatoes. You've got some brown there, you've got some gray there, but that is quite fresh. The light on the skin of these mandarins freshens up this whole image, right? Is there anything else? Okay. Impressionist hero Edouard Manet gets the star treatment in Los Angeles. And so let's have a look. Yeah, some more beautiful paintings by Manet. Look at that. Look at the puppy over there. So it's not that he can't paint detail. He sometimes chooses not to. Just a lady with a book on her lap, and there's a puppy, and that's probably her daughter. And let's have a look. Are there any more? There's that one again. So anyway, if you want to read this article, then you're welcome. And that's just a quick glimpse into Manet, right? So he goes on to say, however this may be, I wanted to look into things myself again. And I find the chance of doing something not smaller but bigger than I thought. I've seen several photos or pictures by Jan van Beers. Some of his things have, after all, much character. But I imagine that someone like Manet, for instance, is much more of a painter than Van Beers and paints more beautifully and artistically. So you can see that he's starting to sort of feel, I like that artist's work. I like his approach. I like that psychology, right? I actually like beautiful art. Does it have to be poignant and dark? Why can't it be bright and beautiful, right? And artistic? Why should art not be artistic? He says, if only I were better known here, if only I could get hold of the models I saw. And so you can feel that rush of life is wanting to be better, is wanting to be something, is kind of feeling like he's trying to make something of himself. There's a bit of ambition coursing through his veins, right? He says, yesterday I was at the cafe concert Scala, something like I'm not sure what that's about. I found it very dull and, of course, insipid, but the public amused me. There were splendid women's heads, really extraordinarily fine, among the good middle-class folks on the back seats. And on the whole, I think what he said about Antwerp true, that the women are handsome. You kind of getting the sense again and again that he's noticing all sorts of different things, including women. He's feeling the rush of life in terms of color, but also in terms of the inner mechanisms, to put it in a weird way, also those gears are turning as well. And he's feeling frustrated. He says, if only I had my choice of models. The mass of German girls one sees at the cafe concerts leave me quite cool. One would say they are all manufactured after one model. So it's quite a, is not, is not just interested in all girls, like running after, he's not like a skirt chaser, certainly not at this point. And so he doesn't find kind of the average girl catches his eye. And then he does start noticing some women sticking out for whatever reason. Bear in mind, even if he did like the mass of German girls, I doubt whether they would like him, that they would find him a kind of a crude country bumpkin, a poor country bumpkin as well. He says, it seems that one sees the same race everywhere, just like Bavarian beer. It seems to be an article exported wholesale. Seems like he's a bit anti-German, doesn't it? I find all those German elements, which nowadays nestle themselves wherever one goes, so terribly annoying. Well, there you have it. Seems like he doesn't like German girls, maybe likes French girls. We'll see. Yeah, 1665, a little bit earlier. It is sure to be just the same in Paris, those bourgeois intruding everywhere. But it is an unpleasant thing to talk about. Now, it's quite interesting. You don't really see him complaining very much. Here he is complaining about a certain race of people, right? And this is pre-World War One, pre-World War Two. He's just not terribly happy with the Germans. He seems to like the Belgians. He seems to like the Chinese. It's not that he's a racist. He seems to like his own countrymen. He doesn't seem to like the Germans that much. He also seems to like the English. Yeah, anyway, it says, through seeing some pictures by others, I get all kinds of ideas for the time when I shall be in the country again next spring. At the same time, my conviction that I must go on with all the vigor I possess is getting stronger. So there you have it in his own words, what his intentions are. This is his self-identifying mission, right? Here you have it out of the horse's mouth kind of thing. Is saying, I must go on with all the vigor I possess. This is Van Gogh coming alive. This is Van Gogh. His father isn't there to criticize him. His father isn't there to, I don't want to say manipulate him, but his father isn't there to sort of block what he wants to do or to pull certain strings. And so he's trying to maybe even make up for lost time. I need to vigorously pursue what I need to pursue. And so he says, Antwerp is beautiful in color. And you notice all these references to color again and again. He says, it is worthwhile just for the subjects. One evening I saw a popular sailors' ball at the docks. It was most interesting and they behaved quite decently. However, that will not be the case at all those balls. I wonder whether the lights are on next door. Let me quickly check. I'm just curious. Let me just give me a second. I'll be back in a minute. I think it is on. Yeah. Yeah, I think the power has been restored. It probably came on about 20 minutes ago. I suppose I don't need to do that. Okay. So let's go back to this screen. What are you guys saying? I've actually got my neighbors on one side have actually got solar panels as well, but on all the other sides, not so far. Okay, so he goes on to say, yeah, for instance, nobody was drunk or drank much. So can you see that's another aspect that is a change for a country bumpkin. Whereas I think Ryan Koberger came out of a situation of intoxication and addiction in Pennsylvania. I don't think Van Gogh came from that. I don't think Van Gogh was, I could be wrong, but I don't think Van Gogh was drinking in Noonan. And he's now encountering one of the, what can one call it? One of the symptoms, side effects, just one of the aspects of, of the urban setting, which is, drinking, but then also the excess aspect. People getting drunk, not just in the country setting, you might have one guy getting drunk. And now you're seeing hordes of people getting drunk, parties, revelries, celebrations, concerts, dances, shows, and people getting drunk. And so what's going to happen, and this is not going to be a very good influence on Van Gogh, he's also going to start drinking. He's also going to start getting drunk. He's also going, before this point, he's 32 years old. Before this point, he's actually been pretty well behaved, pretty sober. He has, consorted with certain people, but he's about to engage in a lot of, sex, drugs, rock and roll kind of thing. This is in a way Van Gogh's student phase, right? He's about to embark in that, and this is almost Van Gogh in Moscow, Idaho, just seeing everything around him, and okay, how can I join this party? Like where do I start, kind of thing, right? He goes on to say, and he is seeing a lot of women as well. He talks about several very handsome girls, the most beautiful of whom was plain faced. Again, there's this kind of humility, this kind of modesty. Now, you must bear in mind he's an artist, so he can appreciate beauty, but he seems to be attracted to the shy, plain-faced girl, right? And I mentioned that in my last video on Koberger, just saying, maybe the right approach was not trying to get the attention of the prettiest girl on social media. Maybe you should just start by talking to the girls around you and, learning to relax and trying to get them to, get their interest and get a little bit of traction. Don't start above your pay grade kind of thing. Start in a modest way, and Van Gogh is certainly willing and able to do that, right? He goes on to say, I mean, the figure that struck me as a splendid Jordaens or Velasquez or Goya was one in black silk, most likely some barmaid or such, with an ugly and irregular face, but lively and piquant it La France halt. So it's quite incredible. He's walking around, and to the average member of the public, they just see this person who looks like a barge captain, right? He seems like a little bit scruffy and maybe a little bit dirty, and they don't realize that there's someone with this real flame in his heart and in his mind that's moving through their streets, right? An artist moving through their streets, one that's going to, um, be beloved decades later and going on for, more than a century later. They're going to make movies, documentaries about him, write books about him, and they're going to sort of pour over every word that is written and every brushstroke that is painted, right? And his art's going to be incredibly precious, incredibly valuable. And he's in the same way that they don't see him, he's seeing in front of him that's a Goya, and there's someone walks by and he sees scenes out of paintings, right? Isn't that remarkable? He's not just some simpleton, some eccentric simpleton walking by. He's actually someone who's really well educated in art as an art dealer, but he's also got it's not just he's trying to sell art, he's got a personal appreciation for it. He spends all of his time reading about art, looking at art. He's an expert, right? In the idea of art, is not quite developed that in the execution of it. And that's what he's trying to get at. That's where he's trying to reach. He describes this woman. She danced perfectly in an old-fashioned style. Once she danced with a well-to-do little farmer who carried a big green umbrella under his arm, even when he waltzed very quickly. Incredible detail that he's remembering here, right? A big green umbrella under his arm, a well-to-do farmer. Other girls wore ordinary jackets and skirts and red scarves, sailors and cabin boys, etc. The funniest types of pensioned sea captains who came to take a look, quite striking. It does one good to see folks actually enjoy themselves. So he's kind of in a party atmosphere. He says, well, you see, I don't sit still, but I can't tell you emphatically enough how difficult it is to be short of money. So he's in this environment and he's sort of feeling a little bit left out. He's feeling a little bit like Johnny come lately. If I had a bit more money, the girls might notice me, kind of thing. The best chance, and I mean, he describes a girl that he likes dancing with a well-to-do farmer, a little farmer, right, who's carrying this big green umbrella under his arm, and he's probably wishing it's me. I wish she was dancing with me, kind of thing. He says my best chance is in the figure because there are relatively very few who do it, and I must seize the opportunity. I must work myself into it here until I get in touch with good figure paintings, Verhaert, for instance. And then I imagine portrait painting is the way to earn the means for greater things. I feel a power within me to do something. Isn't it incredible sentiment? When last have you used those words? And I want to challenge you, if you've got a notebook, if you've got that TCRS notebook or any notebook, write those words down. And when you wake up tomorrow morning, having kind of forgotten about them, reach for your bedside, reach to the notebook beside your bed. Open the notebook, even though you know what you're about to read, and read those words. I feel a power within me to do something, right? Isn't that an incredible affirmation? Isn't that an incredible thing to say to yourself? Isn't that an incredible thing that Koberger needed to say to himself, right? Or even Nicola Bully. Can you imagine if she'd said, you know what, I feel a power within me to do something, right? Even if she didn't, even if he didn't, just to say those words, it feels like something is being summoned from within. I don't need to depend on someone, or I don't need circumstances to change. There's something inevitable about this gushing, this flowing that is coming out of me. This energy that needs to be directed in a particular direction, right? And everything he's saying is completely true, because this power was burgeoning inside of him. A power was building up. And all he really needed to do was to point me in the right direction. And the right direction was Paris, right? So he goes on to say, I see that my work holds its own against other work. And that's the most important thing here. If you could reach across time, reach across that entire, long time ago in a city far away, from where we live, and you could say, please don't give up. You know what? Your work does hold its own. You're never going to see evidence of that, but please believe that. Jose says, I need a TCRS notebook. Shall I quickly give you the link for that? I think I can quickly do that. Here it is. I hope it all fits into one. No, it doesn't. Let's see if I can try and shorten that. I think if I do this, it might work. There we go. So this link should work. Another one, okay. Well, I hope you get one. Okay. So it goes on to say, if I were better off, I should be able to paint more. But as far as producing goes, I'm partly dependent on my purse. This is not Vincent begging his brother. This is him seeing the world in front of him and wanting to participate, wanting to do his thing. He sees the scale of all of this activity, and he's saying, I need to participate. And that's what happens when you do when you travel, when you enter different landscape, when you visit new cities, when you go to places you've never been to before. He goes on to say, I also have an idea for a kind of signboard which I hope to carry out. I mean, for instance, for a fishmonger, still life of fishes, for flowers, for vegetables, for restaurants. So it's actually thinking about painting signboards is actually a good idea. Funny enough, my brother's been asked to paint or design a logo for a townhouse complex, and he was talking to me about how much money should I demand, kind of thing. So it's quite interesting, that similarity. Anyway, he says, I think that if one takes well composed subjects 1 meter by a half or whatever, such a canvas would cost me 50 francs, even 30 francs, and I'll try to make a few. So he's coming up with ideas, right? It's a pleasure. One thing is certain, that I want my things to be seen. Later on, we may lose courage, but we will try and put it off for a long time. Write me again if you should have the time. The end of the month will certainly be terrible unless you can help me a little more. A great deal may depend on my being able to stick to my guns. Aren't those incredibly true words? A notebook with a cover. Yeah, I mean, I've got a cover just kind of around the corner. I'm just gonna move to one side so I can, just right next to my chair. Can you guys see this? So yeah, I don't know why it always does that, but anyway, if my face is there, maybe it'll. Anyway, this is the cover of The Murder of Vincent van Gogh. It's quite weird how it's going through the picture. Maybe if I do it like this, then you can see it a little bit better. But this is quite fun to do, to as someone who's quite autistic, to look at the whole Van Gogh thing and to try and come up with a cover that is that credits Van Gogh, but is also my own creation in a way. In other words, it's an artistic representation by an artistic person of another artist. So you know what I mean? That was quite an interesting challenge. One must not look too hungry or shabby either. So he's talking about sticking to his guns, and isn't that exactly what he did for the next? It's really not that long, 2-3 years. Now we're going into 1886, and he's only got 4 years after that, right? So, but he does stick to his guns, and then he says one must not look too hungry or shabby either. And he's realized that people are, although he's seeing people around him, he's also kind of being judged. You know, he's seeing people, he's appreciating it, but he's also realizing I'm not quite making the grade in terms of my appearance, right? I need to improve, right? If you're not sure about the cover of The Murder of Vincent van Gogh, this is sort of what it looks like. I don't know why it's just done that. So it was perfect until I moved it from that page. Okay, let's try again. I don't know why it does that. Anyway, if you go from here, if I click on here, There it is. I don't know why it does that. Not quite sure why it's behaving so funny. But there's a bit of a glimpse. And part of the challenge was getting the text of the title right as well. It was also quite, I wanted it to look like Vincent's signature. So that was also quite interesting. You see how the signature becomes crows on the side over there. Okay. Okay, let's go back to the letter. On the contrary, one must try to make things hum. And then now we go on to the next letter. So we're now halfway through, and look at these paintings that one of the questions I asked you guys was, and I think we should actually look at the poll, see what you guys say. Do you notice a change in Van Gogh's style and his choice of color? 61% say yes. None of you say no. 39% say I'm not sure. What do you say now? Look at this portrait of an old man with a beard. Right? It's something that in a way you can't believe Van Gogh actually painted. It's probably something you've never seen before, right? Here's another one, head of a woman with her hair loose. It's obviously someone that he's encountered in Antwerp. And here again, you've got some of those typical colors from like the potato eaters and from the potatoes. It's a lot of brown and kind of green, right? But if you look at the old dude, so it looks like that old dude did pitch up. If you look at that old dude, there seems to be a slightly different color emerging. There is that darkness, but this is definitely a slightly different color. There even seems to be blue in his beard. Do you notice that? Seems to be some color in his beard. And some color coming out there. And this is quite well executed. That eye, the ear, this is a pretty well executed painting, portrait. Let's put this on full screen. Can you see he is getting better at his job? Okay. So let's deal with so he obviously didn't paint this, but this is another reference work. And he's obviously feeling the sexual undertones of where he is. And this is literally someone being disrobed in front of a whole bunch of men. I think this is the only woman here. So this is obviously going to be part of what he says in the letter. So let's see what he says. I don't think it's a very long letter, fortunately. It actually is quite a long letter. We're trying to get to Paris, Vincent. Dear Thea, I must write to you again and tell you that I've succeeded in finding a model. I've made two fairly big heads by way of trial for a portrait. Firstly, that old man who I wrote you about, a kind of head like Hugo's, and then also a study of a woman. In the woman's portrait, I brought lighter tones into the flesh, white tinted. So here you have confirmation that he is trying to lighten up in terms of his art. He is trying to brighten up. And it's so weird. He's spending so much money on color, and yet there's just a slight color adjustment thus far. It talks about vermilion, yellow, and light background of gray, yellow, and gray, yellow. Let's just have yellow, from which the face is separated only by the black hair. Lilac tones in the dress. Lilac tones in the dress? Okay. Rubens is certainly making a strong impression. I think he's drawing tremendously good. I'm quite carried away by his way of drawing lines. I go to the museum fairly often, and probably I don't look at those which are generally admired most. I look for fragments, like for instance those blonde heads in um, something du or Purgatoire. I'm not looking for a blonde model just because of Rubens. That seems like he's protesting too much. I'm not looking for a blonde model because of that, but I think you are looking for a blonde model. I'm now looking for a blonde model just hang on. He says, I am now looking for a blonde model just because of Rubens. Okay. But you must not be angry if I tell you that I cannot make both ends meet this month. So guess what he's spending a lot of his money on? I bought some more colors and 2 new kinds of drawing brushes, which suit me splendidly and with which I can work more accurately. Then the canvases which I brought with me were too small for the heads. All that and the models are ruining me. Yeah, I'm sure. I tell you this as emphatically as possible because when losing time, one loses doubly. In the last days of this month, after I've done some more heads, I hope to paint a view of the Scheldt, for which I've already bought a canvas. I can also go there in bad weather. He talks about the Lieve Vroue Kerk, that's Our Lady's Church. I think there's also the Church of Our Lady in Praia de Luz. Other painters have worked there before. I'm very glad I came here, for in many ways it is useful and necessary for me. So can you see, despite the struggle, is feeling invigorated, is feeling positive, is feeling like he's in a can-do state of mind. I made the acquaintance of Tick, the best color manufacturer here, and he was very kind in giving me information about some colors, about green colors, for instance, that are fast. I also asked him things about Rubens' technique, which he answered in a way that proved to me how well he analyzes the material used, which not everybody does, although it is very useful. Fancy that analysis of material used in art. What more shall I tell you? Oh, yes, I've seen 2 collections of modern pictures. So I saw several fine things, 2 studies by Henry de Bracquelier, and it talks about that. He's somewhat like Manet, that is to say, as original as Manet. And that's what he likes. He likes Manet's originality. He likes this different approach. One study was of a woman in a studio. It talks about the flesh color, white with carmine in the surroundings, all kinds of quaint little tones. The other one was a half-finished study of the landscape, yellow, faded flat fields. When you're going to talk about this other painting, oh, there it is. Is it La Riviera? Is it that one? No, it's by Jerome. Okay, I wonder where that is. There it is. Okay, so if you want to read this letter on your own time, here it is. But I'm going to skip a little bit forward. Talks about very fine black tones. And then he says, a picture must be painted, and then why not simply? Now, when I look into real life, so he's almost saying, why not be a little reductionist? Why not simplify all the detail into something more basic, right? Now, when I look into real life, I get the same kind of impressions. I see people in the street very well, right? I see the details. But I often think the servant girl's so much more interesting and beautiful than the ladies, the workmen more interesting than the gentlemen. And in those common girls and fellows, I find a power and vitality which, if one wants to express them in their peculiar character, ought to be painted with a firm brushstroke with a simple technique. It's saying a way to capture the power and the sort of basic character of these sort of blue collar folk is to paint them in a more basic way. you kind of, you almost have an inversion here where he's a country bumpkin and he's saying, I prefer the servant girls, I prefer the workmen, I prefer the whole blue collar vibe to the pretentious gentlemen and the sort of dolled up ladies. And you kind of get the sense that Koberger felt the opposite, that he felt inadequate and he wanted to be part of a sort of stratosphere, a sort of status quo that he wasn't part of. Van Gogh is very happy to be in the milieu that he's in, right? Voters understood this, used to at least, for so far, I haven't seen any work of his here. What I admire so much in Delacroix too is that he makes us feel the life of things, right? That's a lot of what this channel's all about. Feel the life of things. And the expression and the movement that he absolutely dominates his colors. And in a great many of the good things I saw, though I admire them, there's often far too much paint. At present, I'm getting more and more in the habit of talking to the models while painting to keep their faces animated. I've discovered a woman, she's old now, who used to live in Paris and provided the painters with models. So here he's met a woman and she's telling him about Paris, and I think he's starting to get some ideas. He's like, Antwerp is awesome, but Paris is actually even better. And my brother's there, maybe it's not that far away. Maybe I could just go to Paris. And it talks about painters with models, Scheffer, Guigou, Delacroix, and another one who painted a Fernet. I'm not sure what that is. Now she's a washerwoman and knows a lot of women and could always supply some, she said. It has been snowing and the city was splendid early this morning in the snow, fine groups of street cleaners. I'm glad I came here. How many times has he said that now? For I'm already full of ideas. He certainly is. Also for the time when I shall be in the country again. Come on. It was in the Etoile Belge, I think. Is that the station, the train station? Anyway, he says, I think that I read an article by Eugene Bataille. Bataille. No idea how to say that. Bataille. Reprinted from the Figaro about conditions in Paris, an article which impressed me as being very well thought out. So he's starting to think about Paris. It's only December, right? Talks about the opinion of Dutch journalists, expressed himself in Amsterdam pessimistically about the state of affairs in Holland. As to art dealing, as I've already written you, the dealers here complain, and yet I believe that so much might still be done. Again, what an incredible statement. B says, I understand what he's saying somehow. You do, don't you? Mel says, it's wonderful to hear an artist like Vincent van Gogh admiring someone else's work. You don't see that much these days, do you? To mention one thing, for instance, one sees no pictures in the cafes, restaurants, at least hardly any. And how contrary this is to nature. Why don't they hang still lifes there, like the splendid decorations, Fate, Honda Kutter, and so many others made in times of old? Why not women's portraits if they want prostitutes? I know one must work cheaply for such purposes, but one can work relatively cheaply. Raising prices to such a height is the trade's ruin and leads to no good at all. And I must say, he was totally wrong in this. I mean, his work would be the most expensive. And would that lead to ruin? Goodbye, write again between times if you can. As to the money, do what you can. But remember that we must try our utmost to succeed. And I won't let that idea of painting portraits go, for it is a good thing to fight for, to show people that there's more in them than the photographer can possibly get out of them with his machine. Bear in mind, at this time, photography had just come into the world as well. And so he's got to think about how to compete with photography. For example, portrait photography, right? And I think this is perhaps one reason why artists were struggling, or why they were a little bit, you'd say in Afrikaans, dun gesaai, which means spread quite thinly. Might have been because of photography. And so he says, he's got to fight for his place as a portrait painter within this environment of photography and photographers. Goodbye with a handshake, ever yours, Vincent. I've noticed the great number of photographers here. That's also something he sees in Antwerp. He says, and they're just about the same as everywhere, and they seem to be pretty busy. Imagine if Van Gogh became a photographer. But always those same conventional eyes, noses, mouths, wax-like and smooth and cold. It cannot but always remain lifeless. And so he's kind of seeing the flaw in photography, that a photo can be lifeless. And so he's trying to imbue his art with life. He's trying to put something in there, vigor, vitality, energy, electricity into his art. And wouldn't you say he succeeded? Battle in English, thanks for that. And then he says, and the painted portraits have a life of their own, coming straight from the painter's soul, which the machine cannot reach. The more one looks at photographs, the more one feels this, I think. Again, what an intimate look into the context, into the situation that Van Gogh faced at that time. So much incredible detail, right? So we go from the 15th of December to the 15th of December, same day, not a very long letter. He says, Dear Theo, today, for the first time, I feel rather faint. I painted a picture of Het Steen and went to show to some dealers. 2 of them were not at home and one did not like it. And one complained bitterly that in a fortnight, literally not a single person had shown his face in the store. This is not very encouraging, especially when the weather is chilly and gloomy, and when one has changed one's last 5-franc piece and doesn't know how to get through the next 2 weeks. So here we are seeing for the first time a little bit of weakness, a little bit of Van Gogh losing faith, and it's entirely understandable. I mean, bear in mind, he's not going to sell his art until his dying day. So it's almost like the Lord of the Rings. He's a bearer of a ring of power, or he's a bearer of a ring that he can't get rid of, but he can't use it either in that sense. He's got to carry this ring with him, even though he can't enjoy any of those benefits of his art, of his legacy. That's kind of his fate, right? He goes on to say, oh dear, do try to keep me afloat these 2 weeks, for I want to paint some more figures. I wonder what that whole faintness is about. Is he getting some kind of sickness? Is he overworked? Is he doing certain things with his models? What's going on? Has he caught a cold? He says, I don't know if it's true, but at all events, there was a crowd of spectators when I was there, and the exhibition for the raffle was also crowded. If there were more better things on view, more business would be done. But the shops have a desolate aspect. It seems like people are drinking and partying, but they're not shopping. But I greatly prefer to paint the figure. I also believe the market might be overloaded with landscapes, and though painting the figure presents more difficulties because of the models, yet after all, it gives perhaps a better chance. What the dealer says that women's heads or women's figures are most likely to sell. I'm sure he likes to hear that. Yeah, it does seem that way. Yeah, it is a shame. This spring I shall have to decide whether I shall stay in the neighborhood of Newnan or not. I should like to hear your opinion on the matter. So there's a little bit of a hint at I need to move this way or that way. What do you think about that? What's your advice? I cannot understand why Portier, after his first favorable impressions of my work, has become so absolutely indifferent to it since then. I cannot get on when I must spend more on color than I receive. And I'm not the least, but literally not the least, but better off than I was years ago, that winter in Brussels. So it's not like he's living in a dream world. He is very aware that he's not getting anywhere. He's aware that he's working hard. He's aware of the market conditions. He's aware of the challenges. He's aware of photographers. He's aware of that the market seems to prefer models to landscapes, and is aware of his own limits in terms of how much money he has, and yet he's persevering. He says, I receive 50 francs less, but painting costs me much more than 50 francs and it has to be paid on the spot. I do not feel faint as long as I'm painting. So here he's touching again on his health. He says, but in the long run, those intervals are always something, sometimes rather too melancholy. So here he's really talking about it's a rare admission that he's actually feeling a little run down. His health is at a bit of a low ebb. Bear in mind, it's approaching midwinter. It's sort of the middle of December. He says, it grieves me when I don't get on and am always in a bad fix. I think anyone in his situation, anyone who's struggling with money, it's cold, people are looking down their nose at him, that struggle is real. It's a constant thing he's got to try and push away. He says, do you know, for instance, that in the whole time I've been here, I've only had 3 warm meals and for the rest, nothing but bread. Again, that is someone who is been struggling like hell for his art. He's only had 3 warm meals and is mostly eating bread. He is the prototypical starving artist. He's the prototypical struggling artist, right? In this way, one becomes vegetarian more than is good for one, especially as it was the same thing in Union for half a year. And even then, I could not pay my color bill. Just literally eating bread in order that he can buy colors, right? That's how epic this is. Painting is expensive, yet one must paint a great deal. I have half a promise of a model to sit for a portrait. I would do my utmost to get her. Now, what I cannot understand is that people like Portier, like Serre, for instance, if they cannot sell, do not at least get their way of getting me some work or other. Listen, Theo, another thing. I don't think it will seem incomprehensible to you that I haven't had the slightest inclination to write to the people at home. There you have a touching acknowledgement of how he's feeling emotionally. He wants to be away from the apron strings. He wants to come out of his father's shadow. And even though what has happened has been quite troubling and traumatic, he feels like he doesn't want to look back. He wants to go forward. He doesn't want to think about his mother. He doesn't want to think about his sisters. He doesn't want to think about his other brother, Cor. He wants to leave it all behind. And he acknowledges that. I don't have the slightest inclination to write to anyone at home. He talks about my charming sister, Anna. I don't know if that's a bit of a backhanded compliment. He talks about the equally charming members of the family. You kind of get the idea that they were only too happy to have him leave, and there's no love lost at the moment between them and him. As I've received a letter from Mother asking me to write to her and informing me that she has asked you to give her my address, will you let them know I'm not going to write? Which, for that matter, I told them quite simply when I went away. You will understand that things like that, like what happened in March, are decisive. So this is quite a big statement. It's basically saying, I'm holding a grudge. I'm not very happy with you guys. It's basically a bit of an it's quite a rare FU from Van Gogh to his other family members. Mother wants him to write. I'm not going to write. Sorry. Sorry. Then I left the house, from which may be inferred as a matter of course that they got what they wanted, right? A little bit of resentment there. I think of them extremely, extremely little and do not desire them to think of me as far as that goes. So you kind of get the idea that he's not only not thinking of his father, he's not thinking of his family at all besides Theo. Certainly it is regrettable that such things must happen. But then you see there are certain recollections, as for instance, that up to the last, father spoke and behaved toward me. So here it's coming out that he feels this painful sting. That, can you imagine if you are at loggerheads with a relative, that you feel treated not very well by a parent, and then in the middle of that setup, that person dies. And Vincent is authentic enough to say, he's not saying, oh, because you died, I'm going to forget about how I felt, forget about how strongly I felt and how strongly you felt. All of that residual thing is still there. And so how hard it must be to grieve in that context. He obviously feels the pain of his father's death, but at the same time, he's that crumpled yellow book, and he wants to stand for something. And if he allows himself to grieve, he'll be overpowered once again by the big Bible, and he wants to stand up. He wants to stand for something. And so he's literally pushing his whole family away and saying, I need to put you behind me. I need to step forward into my life, right? I don't want to engage, and I don't want to remember those months and years of failure, of humiliation, of running on like a treadmill, but in terms of the family dynamic and a struggle that was made so much harder because of their disapproval of him. Bear in mind, he's a bit of a wayward son, and they are like religious folk, right? He says, Father behaved toward me in the same way as the Roman Catholic priest. And all of that is still weighing on him. Can't I understand of their own accord that for the very reason that you're no longer feeling angry, you have definitely become more estranged from them than if they were strangers. Quite sad. And you can see that he's feeling faint, he's feeling a little dejected. And for the first time in quite a few letters, he's actually talking openly and honestly about how he's wounded. He's wounded by his family. He's, in a way, running away from home, running away from the realities of home, in a way. And for the first time, he's actually dealing with it. He's dealing with dad and mom and sister. Tell mother if you like, for I do not want to say a harsh word to her. So that shows another side of Van Gogh, that he may be quite angry, he may be embittered, he may be estranged, but he's not an arsehole. He's not going to write an angry letter and say, F you, whatever. He is, to some extent, still well brought up. He's still, to some extent, a gentle spirit in a sense. He says, I don't want to say a harsh word to her, but I'm declining to write. Mother is old, and I don't want to tell her sharply that I refuse to write. Such things have happened to other painters too, and it is one of those things it is better to leave alone. So once again, you can see he's actually quite a resilient fellow. He's managing to deal with very complex emotions in quite a mature and how can I put it, resilient way, yeah. And then he changes the subject. At the museum, there's a portrait of Delroche painted by Portals. During his life, he seemed such a big man, but how hollow and empty he proved to be afterward. Manet and Courbet is very inspired by Manet, did not seem serious during their lives, yet how they proved themselves to be real painters. And again, how portentous those words are for Van Gogh himself. I'm starting to feel quite sleepy. I wish I had the resilience of Van Gogh to push through like for another hour, but I don't think I'm going to last much more than half an hour. Timmy, can I put you down? Okay, I really want to try and get to Paris, but some of these letters are quite long, and I don't really want to skip through them. Anyway, he says, by curious mishap, an accident has happened to the portraits of Delaroche, so that a hole was cut right in the middle of the forehead. It looks well and really seems to belong to it. There's quite a curious race of people of whom one would not oppose at certain moments that they are actually absolutely hollow and empty. I wonder who he's talking about there. It is almost 11:30. But I've had 2 nights in a row now of 2 or 3 hours, too little sleep. So I'm definitely a bit run down. He says sometimes it is quite refreshing to perceive one as being mistaken, though then one has to begin all over again from the very beginning. So these are quite interesting words. He talks about being hollow and empty and says one can be mistaken. People can make mistakes. I can make mistakes. B says, I'm in South Africa and dozing off too. Have you got solar power, B? Be interested to know. And then he says, sometimes it can be quite refreshing to see that you've been mistaken. So it does make you wonder, does he feel like he's been mistaken in terms of his adamancy, his digging in his heels in terms of his art? I will paint the potato eaters this way. Isn't he starting to see the light in a way, that maybe another approach is better? Let's see, are we going to get to January? 15 December is quite despondent. 19 December, shortish letter. Dear Thea, I have painted another head of a model whom I could not pay, but having the opportunity, I profited by it. Painting lost. I'm not quite sure what that means. I've also have the firm promise that I shall paint somebody's portrait, and in return for it, 2 studies that I can keep. But I must tell you that I'm at the end of my rope with my last remaining 5 francs. So it's been quite a while since he's written a letter basically saying very explicitly, please help me with money, right? But this is that letter. He says, I've had to buy 2 canvases for those 2 portraits, and the laundry woman has just brought me my clean linen, so that for the moment I've only a few centimes left. So I must ask you most urgently, for heaven's sake, don't put off writing and send me much or little, according to what you can spare. But remember that I'm literally starving. It's quite sad to see that. I mean, he's quite a strong character. Oh, no solar. Okay. Right. And so he is literally starving. If I succeeded in getting about 50 heads, then there's some chance of getting work. That is, I can try to get employment at a photographer's. I was actually thinking of going to the dark side, going to the other side, going to the competition, which I would not like to do permanently, but only in time of need. The photographers seem to be quite flourishing here. Just like the solar installers are flourishing here. One also finds painted portraits in their studios, which are obviously painted on a photograph background, which is, of course, both weak and effective to anybody who knows anything about painting. It's quite an interesting critique of that approach. Now, it seems to me that one could get a much better coloring if one worked from studies painted directly from life on the photographs which one wants to have painted. And after all, this is at least one of the chances one might have to earn something. I was actually thinking of earning money I think, painting on top of photos, coloring photos basically. But whatever and wherever I may want to start, of course, I must have things to show because I need all my good spirits, all my vitality. I must confess, I'm afraid of feeling physically weak. It does make one wonder, has he caught some sickness again? Has he been engaging in certain activities? There's no one to stop him from doing that. And so is he picking up a certain sickness, and is it the sickness that is ultimately going to claim his life? Not claim his life, but undermine his life and all that kind of thing. I showed my view of Headstein to another dealer who liked its tone and color, but he was too engrossed in making up his inventory, and besides, he has little room. But he asked me to come back after New Year. So we're approaching Christmas. You know, what's he going to do towards the Christmas? Bear in mind, the whole ear incident happened at this time of the year. Is he going to try and celebrate Christmas with a prostitute? What's he going to do? It is just a thing for foreigners who want to have a souvenir of Antwerp, and for that reason, I shall make even more city views of that kind. So just coming up with ideas. Yesterday, I made a few drawings of a spot with a view of the cathedral. I also made a little one of the park. But I prefer painting people's eyes to cathedrals, for there is something in the eyes that is not in the cathedral, however solemn and imposing the latter may be. A human soul, be that of a poor beggar or of a streetwalker, is more interesting to me. So can you see what a humanitarian is, right? Good to hear that, Gloria. Thanks a lot for that. He goes on to say, I firmly believe that nothing helps so much to make direct progress as working from the model. Of course, it is a great nuisance to have to pay the models. There's business to be done here, I'm sure, but there seems to be a lot of beautiful women in the city. And I feel sure that money is to be earned by painting women's portraits or fantasy heads and figures of women. It is a real delight to me to work with a better kind of brushes and to have cobalt and carmine and the right kind of brilliant yellow and vermilion. The most expensive colors are sometimes the cheapest, huh? Especially cobalt. The delicate tones one can get with it cannot be compared with those of any other blue. And although the quality of the color is not everything in a picture, it is what gives it life, right? The quality of the color is what gives it life. I just want to put those words side by side. The quality of the color. Caps lock. Color without the U. I can't think of the artist, but there's an artist who only painted blue, who went through like a blue phase. When you look at that blue, you're like, yeah, that is that's quite something. Think about spring and autumn and the colors of leaves and the colors of fields and the colors of fruits. The quality of the color is what gives it life. And so the artist must also represent those colors properly, the colors of flowers, the colors of the sky. As to whether I should like to settle down here for good or not, as the art trade does not seem exactly rose-colored here, and as there seems to be a certain tendency for each of the painters to be his own art dealer, which I suppose will increase more and more, the more sensible thing would be perhaps to keep a studio here. If you have any wishes or ideas about it, either in favor or against it, I shall be glad if you will tell me straight out. So the second time is saying, what's your opinion on what I should do? Theo, what's your suggestion on where I should go? But it strikes me at once that if after a longer or shorter time you might decide to set up yourself, independent of the Goupils. Antwerp might be the place where, given the dismal show windows at present, business might be done by showing good things. So he's actually inviting his brother to basically open up a shop in Antwerp, like, come here. And then it is so convenient to cross over to England from here. Why are all pictures always in frames in the art dealing business? It would be so much better for business if they were light and easy to handle and dispatch. Well, that's really funny that he says that, because all my Van Gogh pictures in my home are frameless. It's quite weird. Definitely quite weird. Trade is so old-fashioned and 3 times moldy. There must be renovation, for the old systems no longer work. So there is another interesting comment that is true, is saying, in with the new, right? In with the new, out with the old, in with the new. The prices, the public, everything needs renovation. The future is to work cheaply for the people, right? That is his attitude. That is his approach. The future is to work cheaply for the people. He's meaning the future of art, or the future certainly for himself, is to produce art cheaply, almost like he's manufacturing art, a one-man art machine. And he wants to make art that's accessible to the masses. He's not trying to sell art to rich businessmen, which is quite ironic, because Dr. Gachet would ultimately, be his patron, and Dr. Gachet would make a fortune out of his art, and would make his art inaccessible literally to everybody. Quite ironic. Starting with capital so very often leads only to losing everything at first, including one's courage and energy, whereas beginning with practically nothing rather makes one's character firmer and more decided. Again, this is a glimpse into psychology. He's saying, if you had a lot, right, if you were given a lot, you would probably struggle, right? If you started with a lot of money, you would struggle with your courage. But if you start off with nothing, you're going to have a much stronger character, and you're going to be more determined. Wasn't that absolutely true? He says, goodbye, but try to write me by return mail, for I'm feeling rather faint. He said this quite a few times. And I think you've got to kind of wonder, is he a hypochondriac? Is he really feeling faint? Is he trying to curry favor? Bear in mind, if he's eating bread and he doesn't even have enough money and he is starving, maybe what he's actually trying to say is, the reason I'm actually dizzy, the reason I'm actually faint, is because I don't actually have food. I haven't actually been eating. He says, I have somewhat overstrained myself with one thing and another, and I need my strength. Goodbye, ever yours, Vincent. It's funny enough, I'm not feeling faint, but I'm definitely feeling sleepy, suddenly feeling quite sleepy. Do we go into January after this? Okay, so I think this is going to be the last letter. Such a long letter. Okay, I'm not going to be able to go through this letter. It's just way too long. So we'll continue the lead up to Paris. I think you'll agree with me. It's not worth rushing this. It's not worth skipping, from here to the end of February. We'll basically just do the next episode as a kind of a part 2 to this. And this is a 2.5 hour episode. We will try and go past 3 hours in the next one. We'll see what we can cover. But have a look at the color. I'm not going to read this letter, but have a look at the color in this portrait. And again, you might say, sorry, I still see a lot of poo. He's starting to deviate from gray, and brown, right? There's quite a lot of yellow in this portrait. There's some peachy tones as well, right? But he's starting to introduce color. And there's and you know, this ribbon is in a way of saying, let there be life, right? And it's a start. I mean, if you look at the poll, do you notice a change in Van Gogh's style and his choice of color? Do you notice that he's actually improving as an artist? Is executing his artworks a lot better? But there is also a slight change, not a huge or fantastic change. It's not a sea change, but there's just a little bit more light and brown and gray is kind of being pushed to the side to some extent. Do you notice that? So I think we're going to end off I'm going to take you back to that documentary, Painted with Words, and we're just going to spend a little bit more time thinking about Vincent in Paris. That's where we're trying to get to. And if things are exciting now, they're going to get so much more exciting in Paris. So we're going to look forward to that. So from your scout leader, I hope you guys found this worthwhile. There were definitely some really stunning pictures we looked at, some very stunning sentiments, some very stunning letters and descriptions. So I hope you found this episode 36 worthwhile. And I'll be back with Van Gogh letters, episode 37, within the next 2 or 3 days. I want to kind of go through 5, 10, 15 letters. Probably won't get that far, but 5 or 10 letters spaced every 2-3 days for the next 6 weeks. So something to look forward to. B says, I enjoyed this. So B, I hope you have a good sleep. I know I am. So I hope you guys have a good sleep. If you're in the UK, sleep well. To all the American viewers, Stephanie, Lisa Stokes, Kelsey, I don't know who's in the US and who isn't, but if you are in America, enjoy the rest of your day and take care. I just want to bring back that documentary and then just greet the last of you guys. Lisa, thanks very much. Thanks, guys. Interesting. Sounds good. Okay, so yeah, so we're going to continue with the last letter from December, and then basically, yeah, we're going to do part 2, and then him going to Paris. So that's how we'll deal with it. Okay, guys, take care. I'm going to just listen to couple of seconds of this Painted with Words, and this is where we headed in the next sort of couple of episodes. Okay, Mel says thank you from British Columbia. Take care. Okay, guys, all the best. Au revoir. See you guys next time.